Welcome back to Open Line here at the Inspiration Conference. We're going to open up the mic here down on the floor and let some of the participants come up and ask some of the questions here of the panel, and we'll seek to respond to that. Please give your name and where you're from as you come up to ask the questions.
Yes, I'm Jeff. I'm from the Grand Rapids area here. I'm part of a ministry that is growing very rapidly. And I have a question to the consultants. If you had any words of wisdom that we can, as technical people, take back to our churches, to the committees, and to the people at the churches, as how we can convince them that this is important, that the technology is important, that we need to readjust budgets if we need to free up some money to make this a better part of our ministry. Do you have any words of wisdom that we can use on that area?
I will address that very directly. It is amazing to me that we spend the money we do on churches for the technology without addressing the number one need, and that is to train people to use the technology appropriately. But the one thing that I want you to remember when you go back to your church is look at your young people. I am amazed today how churches tend to think that you have to be 25 years old or better to be involved in the technology ministry. I am very, very strong and very adamant about involving the youth because they, to a large degree, already understand the technology. They already know it. Kevin?
And hopefully helping to address the question also, one of the things that Bob has said at one of my seminars, which I really think hits home, is oftentimes a church will spend more money to fix the problem that they didn't do right the first time than had they hired the expert that I mentioned before, the consultant, to help them do it right. So I tell churches, don't even start with a budget until after you have an expert on board that can help steer the ship. And then let that person, assuming that he or she is familiar with the church market and what your vision is, let them help the committee come up with the budget because they know what's needed to get the job done.
One of the other things about budgets that you want to keep in mind, though, is if you're a smaller church and you don't have a full-time media person, put money in the budget today to send your people to some of these kind of conferences. It is my personal opinion that churches ought to pay, at the very minimum, the room and board for their sound people and their lighting people and their video people to go to these kind of conferences. And yet most of the people here, if I took a show of hands, would be able to tell me that, hey, I'm here on my own nickel. I'm taking a day off work. I know people who take days of vacation to come to these kind of conferences because it's a ministry. But in my personal opinion, churches ought to be, at the very minimum, paying room and board, if not outright transportation also.
Thanks, Bob. Vance is the other consultant that's represented here. Would you like to respond to the question?
Budgets. When it comes down to working with a church, a lot of times the program requirements and what the goals are and what churches want to do is completely different from what they have budgeted for to spend on the technology. So a lot of times what we do is when we meet with them and we do the programming, we try to take what they're trying to do from a ministry standpoint and convert that into technical tools, and we come up with some budget numbers and we look at the disparity. As long as we can provide the infrastructure for those functions down the road, at a minimum that's what you got to do, because it's a lot cheaper to put in conduit when there's no slab there than it is to saw cut the slab and put in conduit later. Same thing with power. There's a lot of projects that we're working on now that the ministry hands are tied because it would cost so much money to do what they really need and want to do. If they had thought about it before when they were building the building, it's really just minimal cost to add rig points, to add extra conduit, to add extra power, and to do those kind of things. But again, you need to start and look at where you want to be down the road and what you want to be doing. Let me address the budget issue just one more time because it is such a critical thing. There's a lot of people in churches that want to do certain things, but they don't have the money for it. So instead of doing it the right way, they kind of do it half-baked. And the problem with that is it's actually more detrimental to the ministry than not doing it at all.
Very good point.
If I was in in a building where there were severe architectural problems that had to do with the sightlines and the acoustics and a myriad of other things. And the problem is, it's pointless to go there because you just can't function in this building. They would have been better off pitching a tent in the parking lot and meeting in that space rather than spending all the money and building a building that didn't work right. So if you're gonna do it halfway, don't do it. Save the money, spend it on missions. Do something else with it. Put all your money into your sound system and hold off on your lighting until you can do that one right, or prioritize things and do what you can do right, and then hold off and do the other things when you have the budget to do them. But don't do it half-baked, because people's expectations are very high, and they're not going to be happy with it.
Well said, gentlemen. Another question.
Hi, I'm Dan from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and one question that I have involves a technology I have not heard discussed tonight, and that is lighting, or at least a lot. I've been in some church services where lighting really enhances the mood of worship, and I would just like some general discussion from your experiences.
Great question, Dan. I appreciate that. Vance, if you start us off, and then gentlemen jump in there.
Again, from a philosophical standpoint, lighting needs to just enhance the worship experience. What we're doing now is kind of breaking the mold of just standard traditional lighting, and we're going to more motorized fixtures, more flexible automated lighting, that type of thing. You have to be very careful in how it's implemented so that it's done tastefully, because it can get out of control and it can look flaky. But with flexible lighting systems, particularly intelligent lighting, moving mirror and moving yoke fixtures, you can actually have a lighting scene. You can dim to black. The fixtures can reset and move to different locations in different colors, and then they can dim back up again. So it doesn't have to be the disco ball moving around thing that everybody hates, but it can be done very tastefully, and it just gives you a huge amount of flexibility, particularly in rooms that are difficult architecturally, where you can't get a lift in, or you don't have catwalks, and there's just not the infrastructure for it. You may not have space for a dimming rack, so these type of fixtures have built-in dimmers with them. The one drawback is that they usually have cooling fans that do make some noise. So yeah, there's just a wide variety of issues to address with regards to the lighting.
Dave here. I just basically have one key phrase that I use a lot of times, and it enhances what you were saying. You can kill a moment with a moment, and that's very applicable in the lighting world right there. And one thing you don't want to do is overdo, as Vance just said. The other thing you want to try to stay away from, unless you're actually going for a theatrical look in your presentation on Sunday morning or whenever your service is you want to limit a lot of the lighting changes, especially if you're using a lot of theatrical lighting up there, and even architectural. I've seen a lot of, I've been moved by architectural. You know, they zone them out correctly, and you can actually, you know, enhance a lot of things architecturally. But when you're working with theatrical lights, a lot more is, you know, a lot more things are used there, and you want to not drive a wall between your audience and the stage itself. So limit yourself. Be very careful on, again, like Vance was saying, very careful and selective on how you use that application.
Anthony here, adding to this, the two types of lighting we're basically discussing here are architectural, which is your basic room lights, the on-off switches, some dimming, in other words, it can be brought up or down in brightness, and then your theatrical or stage lighting, which gives you the additional lighting for punch or to direct attention or to create a theme or a moment. And one of the benefits about the lighting now is that we have so much control over that lighting. We can do a lot of things with it. And in fact, the beauty of that is we can help move the audience from point A to point B. With the video projection, you're projecting light. Any stray light is its enemy. So the light plot also has to account for the video projection now. And in image magnification, especially when you're using video, which requires high contrast, we must keep a virtual black hole around those screens. And so keeping a lot on the platform and keeping the bounce and the spill and the ambient off the screen is a challenge that most people, it seems, don't really think about until they're already there. In fact, a major church that we've done, on their opening day, had 300-foot candles on their platform, and the screens were completely washed out. They just didn't think about it. Well, we need a lot of light for TV. Well, maybe they did, but they didn't need that much, and it was not even a consideration.
Let's take the last question here.
One last question. We've talked, I'm Doug from Lansing, Illinois. We've talked a lot about technology tonight and the role that it plays in the church. Often reminded myself that the best sound technician is the guy who doesn't ever draw attention to himself. Because
Yes.
it detracts from what's going on in the ministry. What could you, gentlemen, advise ministry team members and volunteers as they involve themselves in the technology at church, the attitude and the approach that they take to enhance what's going on rather than detract from it?
Vance, if you could go ahead and take that, please.
There are several things that are totally unacceptable. Having the system go into feedback is one, because it totally detracts from the entire event that's going on, and missing cues. Those are two things that are there's no excuse for those happening. In order to reach a level of competency where those things can be avoided, is you have to practice mixing the sound just like the worship team comes in and practices, just like the pastor will spend many hours preparing a sermon. You have to prepare for what you're going to do with the sound system. And what that means is maybe you set up a dozen or so microphones on the platform, and you know which ones are where, and you label them, and you set up all your stuff, and you write everything down, and what you do is if you have kids love to do this stuff. You say, okay, what I want you to do is go from one microphone to the other at random, and I want you to just talk into them. Talk for about 3 or 4, say 1 or 2 sentences, then go to the next microphone or go to the one on the other side. And kids love to do this, and what it does is it makes you practice so that when they get up to that microphone, you're going to have it up at about the right level, and you're going to be on cue, and that one's going to be open and ready to go, and then that one comes off when he's off of it, and go to the next one. And it's like you're playing an instrument, and you have to practice it just like you're playing an instrument.
We're going to wrap up our time here at Open Line tonight, but I wanted to reiterate that web address, and that is www.openline.mbn.org, and you'll be able to find the links and resources there. Thanks for being with us tonight, and we wish you God's best.